Hello there, Ramblers, and welcome to another partially obscured edition of Reese Rambles, my weekly podcast all about the latest comings and goings, movings and shakings, and indeed all the rest of it in the worlds of vintage and retro computing, gaming and technology. Now, why might I have been partially obscured this week? Well, you'd be forgiven for not getting the reference if you live outside of the UK and, I guess, Western Europe. But we have had an eclipse this week, so I thought I would talk about that. You know, I like to talk about the weather. The weather has been punishingly hot and dry yet again here in the UK. I've given up even keeping track of temperatures and stuff, but at least we had this to enjoy last night. I should also mention, actually, saying that this happened last night. Today is Thursday. I'm actually recording this on the Thursday evening, the 13th, immediately after work. So it's very, very, very hot here in the studio. I don't have air conditioning or the like, although I have been spending some time in the new studio recently, getting some stuff moved over there and set up. And it's very cool, actually. It's very, very pleasant in there, despite also not having air conditioning. It also doesn't have power or water at the moment, so they are problems that I am working through with my landlord, but I assure you they are problems that will be resolved in the near future. So hopefully I'll be there just in time for winter. And it'll be freezing cold. I'll have the extreme opposite problem to what I've been having here. Such is the life of the retro YouTuber. Anyway, the eclipse. I got distracted. The moon, yes, passed in front of the sun. And where I am in the UK, about halfway up the UK, it was kind of 90-ish, maybe a little bit higher than that, percent obscured. So, pretty much the entire bottom half of the sun was obscured when it peaked at around 7:15 last night. And it was cold and the birds, cold. It was cooler, mercifully. And the birds were all singing in the trees because they thought it was dawn or dusk or whichever. And lots of people damaged their eyesight looking directly at it, as people often do here in the UK, ignoring any and all health advice. I got some photos myself, so here's the first one. This is a colander, and this was they were talking about this on the radio quite a lot in the run-up to the eclipse, so like a strainer thing with holes in it. I'm sure you know what a colander is, or is that a British term? But yeah, it kind of projects the shape of what's going on onto the nearest available flat surface. Takes some practice to focus the old colander, but obviously my years of YouTube camera experience paid off there. We also had, and this does come with a big caveat as well, so please do heed my explanation. We also had a welding mask. Now, when I say a welding mask, I mean we had it. It's a proper, fully dark, old school, old-fashioned welding mask, not one of these automatically switching ones. And we also wore sunglasses as well with it. And of course, we're sure to only look at the eclipse in very, very brief, very brief glimpses for a couple of seconds at a time. So not ideal. Please don't use a welding mask. There was actually a story on the BBC News website this week of a guy who very seriously damaged his eyesight back in 1999 watching the last eclipse through his welding mask. But yeah, with the sunglasses and stuff. And I did take a couple of photos through it. They came out like this. Not all that brilliant, to be honest. For the benefit of my audio listeners, we have a very green, glowy thing going on. Although there is like a little reflection, like a little bit of glare in the shape of the eclipse, kind of at the top. So it's better than nothing, isn't it? I mean, professional photographers out there got far better photos anyway. So it was more about being in the moment and enjoying the experience. And that is the solar eclipse that happened this week. Now, there's also been a lot of talk. I mean, there was this whole thing on the BBC News website, and it's very good, site. A phenomenal site as millions wowed by once-in-a-generation solar eclipse. Now, as mentioned, the last one was in 99, and I'm old, so I do remember that. I was 15 in 1999. I was in a friend's garden. We used a welding mask. Again, please don't use a welding mask to look at the eclipse. And she actually remembers it quite well. We did have a bit of a conversation about it the other day, so that was very nice. And it's now people are saying that the next one is going to be 80 years away here in the UK. And that got me thinking, really, and kind of got me looking into eclipses and things, because they're actually a reasonably common occurrence. They happen sort of every year, every 18 months or so, somewhere in the world. So, all of this talk of this being a once-in-a-generation thing, and, the next one's 80 years away, so people like me in our 40s, let's face it, we're probably not going to be around to see the next one, hopefully. That all assumes that you never leave the country. Now, the next one, I believe, is going to be in North Africa. It's going to, be visible from North Africa, and particularly Egypt. And I believe that is happening in early 2027. So might be a good excuse for a trip to go and see that with the pyramids and whatnot. Very exciting experience. Anyway, that's all the excitement for this week. Like I say, it is very, very warm in here. And also, with me recording this after work, I don't have a huge amount of time because I am going to be otherwise engaged all day tomorrow. So I suppose that will do. As an intro, I apologise in advance for the rather slapdash nature of this week's ramble. But hey, it is what it is. So, in last week's ramble, I mentioned that it was QuakeCon time. Of course, the annual conference to do with all things, Quake, ostensibly, but also id Software and their other games, Doom and the like. And indeed, this year is a very special one for Quake, one of my favourite games of all time, because it is the 30th anniversary of the release of that game, the very much hyped follow-up to Doom, and a very important game in its own right, as I talked about last week. What with it being one of the first games to really kind of push the limits of those early 3D accelerator cards, like the 3DFX Voodoos and the like. And to be honest, I think it's a game that has actually aged surprisingly well. You know, I played Quake back in the day when I was a kid. Of course, it was the follow-up to Doom, one of my favourite games of all time, and I actually got my mum to get it for me from Toys R Us on release day, believe it or not, because she worked on the local retail park, across the road from Toys R Us. I was 12 years old and didn't have my own transport, so she very kindly picked it up for me, and I installed it on our family PC. Now, at the time, I appreciated the graphics, and although it did kind of struggle quite a bit on our PC, and I appreciated the gameplay as well. But one thing I couldn't really get on board with was the whole medieval theme. It was I don't know, it just wasn't really what I was into. I was into like sci-fi stuff, and I think Doom just kind of sat kind of a lot better with me. Obviously, there were some sci-fi and military-based type elements in Quake as well, but kind of maybe not the overriding theme of the game. But I could certainly appreciate it for what it was, and I must say I was actually more of a Quake 2 fan when that came out, although that is not a popular opinion at all. But all that said, it is a series that does mean a lot to me, and it is one that I have very much kept up with over the years. And I have indeed been playing, believe it or not, I have actually been gaming in my evenings, in my spare time over the past week, playing the new episode that I talked about last week that was released as part of that 30th anniversary celebration. So, Dawn of the Machine, it's called. And spoiler alert, it is very, very good. But I'm going to talk about that a bit later on, because I have a video of the week coming up later on in this ramble, which is related to that. So I'm going to use that as the opportunity to talk about all the fun I've been having. But there is some other Quake news. And I will just say up front, actually, just before we dive into this specific story, there is quite a lot of Quake and other kind of first-person shooter-related news this week. So, I guess that's kind of setting the scene for this. And here we go. Anyway, let's just jump into this. This is PCGamer.com, and it is their coverage of a cancelled Quake 4 expansion. Cancelled Quake 4 expansion gets surprise GitHub release after former XCOM 2 developer discovers it on an old hard drive. This essentially saved my life, is the quote from that developer. Story here by Rick Lane. Quake 4 Awakening was in development at Ritual Entertainment before being scrapped. And spoiler alert, again, there is a video of this that I'm going to show later on, but this was pretty much, it was kind of 90% plus complete. There was placeholder voice acting in it, but essentially all the levels and things were built and the cutscenes were done and everything was scripted, and it's all kind of fully playable all the way through, which is quite surprising and I think quite welcome in the Quake community. Now, as mentioned, I did keep up with the Quake series. I didn't really get into Quake 3 after Quake 2, purely because we had dial-up at home and I didn't think that playing against bots was very exciting. I did have Quake 3. It just didn't really suck me in. And Quake 4 was another game that, when it was released, I was very, very keen to kind of jump on and get on board with, because, of course, it was around the same time as Doom 3. It was built on the same engine and, graphically, again, really kind of pushing boundaries and things. And I don't really remember Quake 4 at all. I remember I played it through. I bought it. I had it on my PC. I think I was at college by that point and had built my own gaming PC. But I don't really remember much about Quake 4 at all. I think it was very similar to Doom 3. I think it had a very generic military theme from what I remember. And from what I've seen of this leaked, cancelled expansion, it is very much kind of in that vein. So that is something to bear in mind if you are looking to check this out. I would quite like to, but I think I know better than to promise that I'm going to be playing new releases and things at this point. So anyway, we will continue with the story over on PC Gamer. Typical, isn't it? You wait ages for a surprise launch of additional Quake adventures and then two come along at once. The original game just received an official new episode as part of the shooter's 30th anniversary celebrations taking place at this year's QuakeCon. But now Raven Software's Quake 4 has got in on the action as a build of the sequel's cancelled expansion has been discovered and uploaded to GitHub. Quake 4 Awakening was being developed at Ritual Entertainment, creators of the soon-to-be remastered Sin and its aborted episodic sequel. But the project was canned by Activision due to underwhelming sales of the base game. Underwhelming sales of Quake 4. The expansion was thought lost to time until a veteran game developer chanced upon a copy on the hard drive of a second-hand PC he bought. Said developer is Justin Marshall, a programmer who once worked on games such as The Evil Within, XCOM 2, Dead Island 2, and the Dark Pictures anthology, and unfortunately is one of the casualties of the industry's massive swathe of layoffs. The discovery of the build appears to have had a profound impact on him. I came across this at a very sad point in my life. It was on a hard drive on a vintage computer I bought off Amazon, Marshall explains on the expansion's GitHub page. Literally, this essentially saved my life. I was going through a divorce and just happening to come across something like this was insane. While there's an outside chance this is an elaborate prank, everything points to it being legit. A big clue can be found in the config files, some of which are named after then employees at Ritual, such as legendary Duke Nukem 3D level designer Richard Levelord Gray and Michael Romsteady Russell, who has discussed the Quake 4 expansion in the past. I will say, I'm not going to continue reading this story because that's pretty much all you need to know, but if it is a prank, it certainly is an elaborate one because you can actually go and download the entire thing and play it, and there are indeed videos out there of people playing this thing. So if you are a huge fan of Quake 4, for some reason, like I say, I seem to remember it being pretty nondescript. I don't think I hated it. I just don't really remember it. There's some more content. And of course, if you're interested in preservation and game development history and all of that kind of stuff, as indeed we do tend to be here at Reese Rambles, I think this is a really interesting thing. And it's just so cool to find a game that was kind of in this state of completion. Why didn't they push it over the line? You know, why not get the proper voice actors in, record the last bits of outstanding dialogue and just shove the thing out of the door as some kind of budget release? Try and get some of their money back. I don't know. I guess we'll never know. But it's not every day a complete expansion, unreleased and cancelled, gets discovered on a second-hand PC, no less. I had no idea you could buy second-hand PCs on Amazon, particularly of this era, by a game developer who saw the code, knew what it was, knew what they were looking at, and had the incredible, presence of mind to upload it to GitHub for the whole world to enjoy. It's just quite the fortuitous turn of events. But there you go. Sometimes life does indeed turn out that way. My goodness, it's warm in here. Did I mention how warm it was? Yeah, I am actually starting to feel it now. And it's going to get a whole lot warmer because I am about to talk to you about Wolfenstein. That's a fantastic series of games. Of course, we had Wolfenstein 3D from id Software, the predecessor to Doom, and after that, we had Quake. So it fits in rather nicely with this week's rather heavily Quake-themed episode. But I bought something that I talked about last week. This isn't a sponsored segment at all. This came up on my radar and I bought it with my own money. These people don't even know that I exist. If you do know that I exist, why didn't you offer to send one of these to me for free? It's not very nice of you. Anyway, I bought the fire pit, the Doom fire pit, and I'm going to talk about it for a second before I get into the next story, because there's not much substance to the next story, really. So, we've got to pad things out a little bit. Also, I'm getting a bit delirious. Now, this is the fire pit from this company. It's called a Mini Blaze from the Fire Pit Company. Again, hashtag not sponsored. And I thought I would unbox this. I'm just going to chuck the paperwork on the floor because it does have my address on it. I thought I would unbox this as part of this ramble. And like I say, there's no real rhyme or reason to this one. So, this is I thought this was quite cool for the price. It was less than half price, I believe. I guess they're offloading these because Doom: The Dark Ages didn't prove to be nearly as popular as people had hoped. I've just noticed you can't really see what that is on the monitor. I do apologise. A bit of a double whammy, actually, because YouTube viewers can't really see what it is, and my podcast listeners, I'm doing a really terrible job of describing it, like I always do. So this thing is about football size, I guess. It fits rather nicely in the hand. It's octagonal, is it? And it's made of laser cut, what do you call it? Powder coated metal, steel, I guess, in black. Doom: The Dark Ages. We've got the medieval Doom guy here on the front, and we've got all the dragons and various other Doom themed things here. I think that's an imp holding a sword of some description. My goodness, you can't see this at all, can you? I do apologise. Still, ad hoc ramble this week, and I thought I would go with the most metal, the most hardcore, the most demonic, inclusion that I could come up with out of their predefined options, because you can choose which candle you want to come with it. You can have the outdoor burner, you can have a citronella version of that to obviously scare the insects away, or you can have various fruity scents. So I chose English Country Garden. And I was going to have a big reveal here where I lit the candle and, of course, introduced it to the Doom Shrine behind me, my collection of Doom-related releases and paraphernalia, as my very first Doom: The Dark Ages collectible. But they messed up my order. And they actually sent this instead of my English Country Garden scented candle. It's some kind of outdoor wax burner thing. And I think, what with half the world being on fire at the moment, I don't think that lighting that at all is a very good idea. I'm not going to be lighting it outdoors. And to be honest, with the temperature in here today, I'm certainly not going to be lighting it indoors either. So I'm going to have to get onto them and ask them to send the correct candle so I can enjoy its pleasant scents. But anyway, Doom: The Dark Ages mini fire pit. It looks quite cool, I guess. Again, they haven't paid me to talk about this. They haven't sent this to me for free. I bought it myself. But it's a nice addition to the Doom Shrine, and it gives me an excuse to give the Doom Shrine a bit of a shout out this week. So I'm going to add that to the collection just there. There we go. Can you see that? No, that's behind the microphone. Let's move the microphone. There it is, look. Oh, it's in the Doom Shrine. Anyway, I mentioned that I had a Wolfenstein-related story for you, so we're going to talk about that now. Not very much really to report on here, hence the waffling about the candle thing, but hey, I think it's quite interesting, certainly to our German viewers and listeners in particular. That's right, I know there are quite a lot of you out there, and I actually have some German news for you. Das ist gut. So, Heise Online, I do apologise for that accent. It wasn't meant to be offensive. Heise Online, heise.de, Return to Castle Wolfenstein is now being sold uncensored. I wasn't sure going into this whether to go with the proper pronunciation of Wolfenstein or not. I'm going to stick with Wolfenstein because if I don't, Return to Castle Wolfenstein is now being sold uncensored on Steam. And God, I sound like Goldmember, don't I, from Austin Powers? Yeah, let's not do that. Bethesda is selling Return to Castle Wolfenstein uncut in Germany for the first time. On Steam and GOG, the shooter released in 2001 currently costs €2. So, of course, the Return to Castle Wolfenstein games in the early 2000s were actually very highly regarded, and I didn't actually play them at the time. I think I was distracted by stuff like Half-Life and Deus Ex and like the original Halo on the original Xbox, stuff like that, and never actually played Return to Castle Wolfenstein when it was first released, but I have recently revisited it. And I'm glad that I did, because it is a very solid early 2000s shooter. But of course, like the other entries in the franchise, it was censored in Germany because of certain imagery featured in the game relating to Germany's past, which a lot of people are understandably very sensitive about. So I'm just going to let the story explain it, because it explains it far better than I ever could. It took a long time. The classic Return to Castle Wolfenstein is available uncut in Germany for the first time. Bethesda Germany announced on Thursday via X. The first-person shooter released in 2001 can be purchased in this country. this country being Germany, via Steam, GOG, and the Microsoft Store in its international version. Currently, Return to Castle Wolfenstein costs only €2 on Steam and GOG instead of the regular €5. I mean, it's a bargain at €5, even more a bargain at 2. The occasion for the release is QuakeCon, of course, which runs until Sunday, that's last Sunday, and Bethesda's 40th anniversary. Bethesda Germany writes on X. Previously, the game's store pages were not accessible from Germany. The sale is made possible by a decision from the Federal Centre for Media Harmful to Young Persons. The shooter has no longer been indexed since February the 24th. In addition to the PC version, the console versions Tides of War and Operation Resurrection were also removed from the index. The removal from the index came earlier than expected. Index content is removed from the list after 25 years anyway, as long as no subsequent indexing occurs. Return to Castle Wolfenstein was indexed in 2002 and would therefore likely have been released in 2027 anyway. It is unclear whether Bethesda actively applied for a new review. The company did not respond to an inquiry from Heise Online. Swastikas possible in video games. Now we get down to the crux of the matter, of course, if you hadn't worked this out already. Return to Castle Wolfenstein was indexed due to a high degree of violence, although a cut version without Nazi symbolism was released in Germany. Swastikas and other Nazi symbols were taboo in video games in Germany at the time. It was only in 2018 that the German legal interpretation changed. Since then, the social adequacy clause of the 86A paragraph 3 of the Criminal Code, which was already applied to films, can also be extended to video games. The clause allows swastikas in video games if they serve art, science, or the depiction of current events and history. The USK decides on a case-by-case basis which titles meet this requirement. Several modern Wolfenstein games have made it to the German market with swastikas this way, although it doesn't mention which games those were specifically. But of course, the modern entries in the franchise were created by Machine Games, who, coming full circle, made the new episode, which we are going to be talking about again a little bit later. So, rather odd and unhinged news item for you there, but a fire pit unboxing and some good news for German Wolfenstein fans. And indeed, it's selling for €2 at the moment. I thought it was a fantastic game. Definitely well worth checking out, even at twice that price. And now in its full, uncut form. Soldiering on, as we are with this week's theme of 90s first-person shooters, I guess. Yeah, I think things are going that way, although I promise not all the stories this week are about that particular topic. But no conversation around that topic, or indeed that specific era, is complete without mention of Unreal from 1998. I'm not talking about Unreal Tournament, those online multiplayer games released in the early 2000s, which, as mentioned, alongside Quake 3, did largely pass me by back in the day because we lived in the countryside and we had dial-up. No, I was all about the single-player, story-driven experience. And we got a Voodoo 3 card at some point. I think it may have been around 98, 99-ish. I think it wasn't brand new at the time. It would have been a kind of a bargain bin thing because things were just moving so quickly at the time. And the Voodoo 3 that we got, that 3DFX, of course, 3D Accelerator card, came bundled with a copy of the original Unreal, which I'd heard about, and I think I'd seen some screenshots in magazines and stuff, but I wasn't really expecting, and it wasn't a game that was really kind of largely on my radar. But I popped it in, purely to check out the graphics and what the card was capable of, and I was blown away by it. And I will say that whenever anyone came by my house, any of my friends from school or whatever, and I wanted to show off what our PC was capable of, I would fire up the original Unreal. And it's a game that's always stayed with me for that reason. Lots of exploration and kind of really interesting landscapes and creatures and things, and, some very, very solid first-person shooter combat as well, which, of course, gave rise to those online Unreal Tournament games, which I mentioned a second ago. However, apparently those graphics were far, far too good for certain people out there, because apparently people have been clamouring for a CGA version of Unreal. Have they? I don't know, but it exists now. So I suppose we should check it out. This is UnrealCGA.com. What if Unreal had been released for DOS, CGA, and 286 class machines? Indeed, I often find myself asking myself that question. Unreal CGA is a free, unofficial, fan-made project inspired by Unreal 1998, rebuilt as a CGA-style FMV/text adventure for old DOS machines. It is not affiliated with, endorsed by, or sponsored by Epic Games. So you require the original game, although I will say there is that release called Old Unreal, which I talked about a few months back, available on archive.org, so you can go and download that for yourself for free. That is kind of somewhat officially endorsed as well, from what I remember. And you have to install the original game on the same drive as this Unreal CGA project in a folder named Unreal. And basically it gets all of its assets from the original install files, which does lead to some rather comical system requirements. So, Unreal CGA is tested not only in DOSBox and DOSBox X, but also on real hardware. A 286 CPU, that's at 10 megahertz minimum, 16 to 20 optimal, so that's a very high-end 286 machine. I do own a 286, but it is 8 megahertz from what I remember, so it's probably going to struggle with this. An original CGA card or clone, a Sound Blaster or compatible, which would have been a very high-end card indeed in the 286 era. Maybe I would have liked to have seen this project targeting AdLib cards, maybe for a bit more authenticity, but hey, it is what it is. I certainly can't complain. You need 1 megabyte of RAM, which is fine, and a mouse, and 4.2 gigabytes of disk space. Bearing in mind these 286 machines would have come with, a 20... 30, 40 megabyte hard drive at most, maybe. That's megabytes, not gigabytes. But yeah, you need 4.2 gigabytes to install the original game files, of course, which this will use during the course of the game. Due to its FMV-style structure, the full game is expected to require approximately 4.2 gig of disk space. Because of this, DOS 7.1 or FreeDOS 1.4 and a single large FAT32 partition will be required. I like IBM PC DOS, I just want to put that out there. And of course, I think a lot of people have these SD card and compact flash interfaces in their old machines nowadays, so perhaps not as amusing as it sounds. But yeah, 4.2 gigabytes. I mean, this would have been a PC from, around 1990, something like that. This kind of higher-end 286s, maybe even a bit earlier than that. And I think 4.2 gigabytes of disk space would have been utterly inconceivable at the time. So it did make me chuckle. Anyway, let's not get too hung up on that and check out these screenshots, because this is so impressive, isn't it? I mean, look at this. I can't click to expand these. That's a shame. But you can see side-by-side shots. So we've got the kind of starting area, starting that kind of prison ship thing, don't you, from what I remember, in a cell, and you kind of explore that for a bit. But this has these full-screen diaries that pop up. Benjamin Nathaniel's diary, day 93. Today is my birthday. I will celebrate by attempting to start another prison riot. The guards have been watching me since breakfast. They know I'm bored, and a bored man in this place is more dangerous than a hungry one. Cell block routine has become too easy to read. And then it's got some more story stuff there, but you can see here side by side the comparisons. I mean, this was such an impressive looking game back in 98, but how this has been lovingly recreated in CGA, presumably using some kind of engine that actually renders this from the original game files. That's interesting to think about, isn't it? But it is very recognisably Unreal using this colour palette. And I need to remind you that this runs on an original 286 and an original CGA card. This isn't some kind of shader for Unity or something like that. This is actual real period correct hardware from that era. It's just amazing. Yeah, how good this looks. These are static screens. I will remind you, this is point and click. This is FMV. This is not an environment that you can wander around in real time and explore. But still, this is good stuff. So check out the FAQs. Explains what the game is. Of course, we know that. We've been through that. It's not a 3D game. It's closer informed to a classic pre-rendered adventure game, such as Seventh Guest or Riven, than to a real-time 3D shooter. The project was designed around very low hardware requirements, a 286 class PC, 1 meg of RAM, and a CGA graphics card. Does it work on every old PC? It should work on many old DOS PCs, and I have seen mentioned elsewhere that this will run on, of course, EGA and VGA cards that support CGA graphics. Also runs in DOSBox, as mentioned, and you need the original version of the game. So, all pretty straightforward, and it is indeed a free download from the website, a 772 megabyte a zip file, which even in itself would have been inconceivable back in the 286 days. Still, Unreal, one of the most graphically impressive games of its era, 1998, that golden era of late 90s 3D first-person shooters, rendered in CGA on authentic, real period-correct hardware, if you turn a blind eye to the storage requirements. I love it. Wonderful project. So I imagine a few of you out there are probably getting 90s FPS fatigue by this point, so we're going to put that topic on hold just for a moment while I talk about some other stories from this week. And this one is very much related to another great love of mine from those 90s days of me discovering computers, discovering my love for gaming and all the rest of it. Now, this is a topic that I have talked about quite a bit here on Rees Rambles because it is another one of my first computing and gaming loves. It is the Atari ST. That's right, my introduction to 16-bit home computing, to the graphical user interface, and indeed to the most impressive games I'd ever seen at the time, coming from the Acorn Electron, which blew up. It's a story I've talked about before. Yeah, our Acorn Electron literally blew up. So go back through previous rambles if you want to hear that story. But some rather excellent news for Atari ST fans this week, or indeed anyone looking to become an Atari ST fan, maybe. If you want to check it out via emulation, or the rather excellent Mr. Core, or one of the various other modern methods of checking out Atari ST games and software. There is a rather convenient and rather neatly packaged new option available to you if you are looking to explore its rather excellent game and software library. So, as reported over here on tomshardware.com, Atari ST public floppy database is now open for everyone. Online archive originally designed for the ST flashcart, packed with classics and homebrew. A story here by Mark Tyson. From 1990s classic compilations to 2026 mega demos, this frequently updated database is now open to all Atari 16-bit fans. An extensive Atari ST floppy disk database can now easily be accessed by all netizens. Originally created to serve floppy images to the owners of the side cartridge multifunction hardware add-on for the Atari ST family, anyone can now browse, search and download the .st files to use with other hardware emulators, or even to rewrite the disk images to actual floppies. Of course, ST formats files are completely unencrypted. They don't include any copy protection or anything like that, so you can actually write them. You can use a PC, you can use a DOS PC to actually write those to real double density floppies and stick them in your real ST, if you like. So that's cool, isn't it? Anyway, back to the story. After reading the announcement, I decided to check out the online repository. My favourite old platformer series was there, with more than one disc featuring the legendary Turrican and Turrican 2 releases. I also checked and confirmed public domain / shareware favourites like Gravity Force were available, as was Llamatron and the Mono High Resolution Bolo. I don't think I played that. Some things I looked for, like the stupendous demo, seemed to be missing, as were serious art and DTP tools I used to dabble with in the 90s. So evidently not a complete archive as of yet, but certainly getting there because, as Mark Tyson reports, the database is pleasingly new and regularly maintained though. For example, it has 41 Atari ST discs flagged as recent arrivals. There are a mix of old releases being added and some extremely new titles like homebrew games and a collection of demos released at Summer Hack 2026 just last month. As indicated in the intro, this disk database was originally collated for direct access via hardware designed to bring several modern conveniences to those who still cling to original Atari ST family computers. The side cartridge slots into the computer's cartridge port, hence the name. It's much more than a Gotek-style flashcard floppy loader, though. The Raspberry Pi Pico WRP2040 microcontroller-powered device can also load different ROMs and via its micro SD card slot. Also provides hard disk emulation, network features, and access to RTC, modern keyboards, mice, and other peripherals. So yes, I am familiar with the side cartridge. Very, very nice piece of hardware, and it did indeed, or does indeed, offer the option to load these .st disk images via the Atari ST's cartridge port over Wi-Fi. And it seems that they have provided a public front end to the database behind that. So now anyone, even if you don't own the side cartridge hardware, can get on board and download their game and software archive, which is very, very welcome. It's nice to see these old games and things being preserved in such a nice, user-friendly and accessible format. And yeah, more of this, please. And if you want to support the authors of this, I guess, go out and buy a side cartridge for your Atari ST. My next story is all about that other exciting task, which we were all using our PCs for back in the early 90s. I am, of course, talking about word processing. That's right, and all joking aside, I have, of course, talked at length about how the 90s was a golden era for gaming, but we can't forget desktop productivity software as well, because a whole generation of people could suddenly have their own PC at home and they could sit and type out their own letters, they could do their own accounts, they could keep their own spreadsheets and design their own flyers and stuff and print them off. And it was a time when you actually owned that software. You installed it on your PC. It was yours to use in any way that you wished. You didn't have to pay a cloud subscription. You didn't have AI stuff that created all the content for you. It was, hey, perhaps I am just showing my age here, but, I used to enjoy, as a kid, oddly enough, playing with stuff like Word, writing stories in Microsoft Publisher, making my own posters and things, and even... I was going to say Access there, but creating my own little bits of software and stuff, Visual Basic and that kind of stuff as well. And I guess that all kind of led me down the path that I have followed in my life as a software developer. Now, before the days of Microsoft Office and Microsoft Works, we had stuff like, WordStar and WordPerfect and stuff like that. But in the early 90s, Microsoft Word was starting to muscle its way into the market, much like Windows was as well, of course, and before too long became the dominant force in the word processor market, as it is still today. Although hopefully that iron grip is starting to loosen, what with some terrible, terrible business decisions that Microsoft have been making lately. Anyway, all that is to say that if you want to discover the earliest history of Microsoft Word for Windows, you can do that now on your modern Windows machine without having to resort to firing up old hardware or, setting up an emulator or what have you. Because this story on neowin.net reports that a developer has ported Word for Windows 1.1a from 1990 to run natively on Windows 11. A developer recently published a working native x64 port of Microsoft Word for Windows 1.1a. You can run it on your Windows PC right now. And there's a screenshot of it. That's Windows 3.0. That's completely unrelated. Why have you put that on there? Anyway, there is a screenshot further down the story, so let's continue to read. Microsoft's Office suite, along with its most popular member, Word, has evolved greatly over the years. What started out as Microsoft's entry into the text and document editor market back in the 80s has now transformed into an AI-powered platform that doesn't even require you to type your own text. Although Microsoft Word is now more capable than ever, one can't help but wonder, do we even need all those advanced features? Here's a clue, you don't. Of course, you could say that if Word is too overwhelming, there's always Notepad. But even Notepad is a far cry from its roots of being a simple, bare-bones text editor. Of course, they added Copilot to bloody Notepad, didn't they, recently? I'm not a Windows user, but I do have occasion to have to dabble with it, unfortunately. Anyway, maybe the solution is to just go back in time to when it was all simpler. As far as I'm aware, time travel still isn't possible, but that doesn't mean going back to the roots of Word is entirely out of reach. Developer and long-time NeoWin reader and forum contributor Justin Marshall has done exactly that. Justin played with some vintage code and published a working native x64 port of Microsoft Word for Windows 1.1a. It arrived in 1990 as the second update to Word 1.0, the first version of Word to ever run on Windows after years of being available only on MS-DOS, hence the name Word for Windows. A lot of people don't know that. Word did actually start on DOS rather than Windows. The project takes the original 1990-era source code, which Microsoft open-sourced in 2014, gets it running as a proper 64-bit Windows executable. So, looking at the program, it brings you right back to the early 90s era of computers. There's no Copilot button, cloud saves, fancy design templates, or most of the advanced features you see in today's iterations of Office apps. There's just a sheet of paper with a couple of formatting options and, of course, the signature early Windows design language. And here is that screenshot I was talking about. Look at that. My goodness, it's beautiful. Yeah, that is Microsoft Word 1.1a ported to x64. We can see we've got text alignment tools here, left, right, centered, justified. We've got, I guess that's vertical alignment there, top, bottom, and middle. We've got paragraph markers, bold, italic, underline, and not a lot else, actually. Your font and your font size, and that's pretty much it. And that's all you need, isn't it? If you're just going to bash out a basic letter or whatever. I do think we overcomplicate things nowadays. Anyway, back to the story. For anyone who's used Word in the 90s or even the noughties, although this is where Word started getting in today's shape, but still, this one will invoke a lot of memories. And it's not just about Word itself either. If you were part of the early Windows ecosystem in general, this alone could be enough to bring the whole picture flooding back. This isn't Marshall's first project in this space either. He's become a specialist in reviving old software and games on modern hardware. You can check out his GitHub page, where you'll find projects like Quake for Doom, which merges the Quake 4 SDK with the Doom 3 engine, and Duke Nukem Forever, remade using id Tech 4 and leaked assets from the notoriously troubled original release for some more trips down memory lane. And if you want to try Word for Windows 1.1a, there is a link to download it there. And this is the perfect opportunity to mention that everything that you hear mentioned in this week's Ramble, as always, is available down in the description. There will be links to every single story if you want to go and investigate further. I did check out the GitHub page, I will say, and there aren't really, there don't seem to be many readmes on many of his repositories, so quite difficult to decipher what they're all about. But indeed, there is some kind of interesting looking version of Duke Nukem Forever on there as well. Which I guess brings us back full circle, and indeed there was a mention of Quake as well, wasn't there, to our 90s first-person shooters. We just can't get away, can we? So we've covered the mid-90s, we've covered the late 90s, we've covered the early 2000s, and in that previous story, 1990. But for this next one, we need to go even further back into history, into the deepest, darkest depths of the world of computing, all the way back to the 1970s, believe it or not, and perhaps one of the most important CPUs ever devised, you know, one of the ancestors of those Wintel PCs that we all have to put up with today. So, this is a real museum piece, this next story, and something that it seems is in desperate need of some restoration. A very important piece of computing history indeed. So, without further ado, let's give this object the reverence it so deserves and head over to tomshardware.com. And another story by our good friend Mark Tyson. Owner of original Intel 8080 pre-production layout seeks restorer. Handcrafted rubylith mask shows 5,000 transistors and interconnect patterns of the fabled 2 MHz CPU. The same computing history artifact was previously pictured alongside Andy Grove, Robert Noyce, and Gordon Moore in 1978. And indeed, that is the Gordon Moore. And we'll see more of that picture in a second. But yeah, the way that these CPUs were originally designed is that they would etch it out by hand on this rubylith stuff, this mask, and then by the power of magic, it would be shrunken down. Well, we're going to learn a little bit about that in this story anyway, but yeah, long before kind of modern CPU manufacturing techniques with their nanometer scale engineering stuff. Let's continue with the story. The owner of what is claimed to be the original engineering copy of the Intel 8080 rubylith mask has shared a social media shout-out looking for a skilled restorer. From the shared photograph, this important artifact from the history of computing looks like it would benefit from remounting and reframing. Hopefully, the handcrafted large-scale sheet of red film has remained in good condition under glass, though. The framed artifact is likely genuine and original, as its current owner is thought to be related to Internet Hall of Fame inductee Dan Lynch, a pivotal figure in the early internet's success. So I've broken my golden rule here and allowed the Twitter embed of this, just so you can see it. Look at that fantastic hair there. Tom Lynch, hey, long shot, but I own the original engineering copy of the Intel 8080 rubylith mask. I need to get it restored. Anyone know the right guy? There we go. If you unfurl the tweet above, you can see Tom Lynch, a self-described arborist and the owner of an AI infrastructure startup, standing behind the framed chip artwork. Folks comment on the rubylith looking just like the one that the Intel Trinity, Andy Grove, Robert Noyce and Gordon Moore were photographed beside in 1978. And there it is. There is indeed that photo. Rubylith is simply an adhesive, peelable red film that found favour in graphic arts and chip design before designers went digital. Engineers could cut away parts of the film to define where light would be exposed during photolithography processes. Rubyliths would often be marked with pens, tape and overlays, especially as designs were iterated and refined ahead of tape out. The Intel 8080's primary architect was Federico Fagin, and it was manually drafted in the age before modern CAD. This human-scaled draft is likely 100 times magnification compared to the finished processor die. Even scaled this large, it would still be quite an intricate drawing, as it had to map around 5,000 transistors, traces, etc. into an approximate 20 by 16 inch sheet. The commercial Intel 8080 release ended up being manufactured on a 6 micrometer silicon gate process. Is that right? Micrometer. Originally ran at 2 megahertz clocks, and later revisions would boast clock speeds of up to 3.125 megahertz. My goodness. Intel's 8080 was an important 8-bit microprocessor for both the company and the advancement of personal computing. The 8-bit CPU was the one chosen for the Altair 8800, was the original target architecture for the CP/M operating system, and would be a big influence on the later x86 architecture. So there you go. That is the original rubylith mask that was used to create that 8080 CPU. As mentioned, drawn out by hand, etched out of that adhesive sticky plastic substance, and then, a photographic process essentially was used to project it and shrink it down onto actual silicon. I can't even imagine. I mean, I can picture kind of how that would work, but my goodness, that's some insanely complicated engineering, isn't it? Very impressive stuff from 1978. Anyway, the story here is, if you happen to be watching this or listening to this and you have any experience whatsoever in restoring rubylith 1970s CPU dies, please do get in touch with Tom Lynch. And you know what? While we are back here all the way in the past in the 1970s, let's check out another piece of current technology, another huge influence on the world of computing, and in this case, arcade gaming. And what better place to start than with the very first, or at least what is widely recognised to be the very first commercial arcade game. So let's head over to Time Extension, because this is your chance, a very rare chance indeed, to actually own one of these machines. And these do not come up for sale very often. Practically unobtainable. Here's your chance to own an incredibly rare piece of arcade history. Story here by Jack Yarwood. And this is being sold by the old boss of Shiny, if you remember those, David Perry. And this is available for auction. So there's a live auction at the moment if you would like to go and bid on this and have your chance to own an original computer space. Yeah, indeed, computer space. Ever wanted to own a piece of arcade history? Well, now's your chance. David Perry of Shiny Entertainment fame is having a clear out and is selling his rare green sparkle 2-player version of Computer Space on an auction site, giving players a chance to own the 1973 revision of the first arcade video game ever created. Indeed, this is the 2-player version. The original was single player, but this was very quickly followed up with this 2-player version. Now, there is also an Atari connection to this story, because this game was created in 1971 by Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney under the name of Syzygy Engineering, which of course later on went on to be rebranded as Atari. And this was their very first release. I guess there was Pong as well. Anyway, in collaboration with the manufacturer Nutting Associates. It was designed as a variation on the 1962 computer title Space War, featuring space combat, but inevitably proved difficult to market, as its controls were considered slightly too complex for the audiences at the time. Originally released as a 1-player game, a 2-player variant was launched by Nutting in 1973, featuring joysticks on the cabinet in place of the original rotational buttons, with this version being one in Perry's possession. I ran out of space and I'm selling my Computer Space arcade machine at auction, writes Perry. It's probably the rarest arcade game in existence found in museums. And actually, I totally agree with that. That's not overstating it at all. Very, very historically important machine. The auction started at the end of last month and is expected to last until August the 21st, highest bid being blah, blah, blah. The cabinet is in fine condition with some slight scuffing and scratching to the body, says the listing. The machine itself lights up and the screen is functional. Original working two-player computer space arcades are practically unobtainable and very rarely offered for public sale, with this example all the more impressive for its immaculate cabinet and original parts. And I just want to talk very briefly about myself before we take a look at this auction listing, because I actually have some history with this game, believe it or not. This is a photo of me, pre-beard, a few years ago, at the Pinball Museum in Las Vegas, where they actually have one of these machines, this 1971 computer space. This is an original. It wasn't up and running at the time, unfortunately, so I didn't get a chance to actually play on it, but still, to be in the presence of such a thing, and also colour coordinated with it as well, as you can see from the photo. Bit of a short cabinet. I mean, I'm not a very tall guy myself. I'm 5'10", 5'11", something like that. And it's a little bit shorter than me. And this wonderful flowing curved, enclosure, before we got to the kind of the more familiar wooden arcade cabinets that came a bit later on, it was actually produced in conjunction with a local hot tub manufacturer, believe it or not. This is fiberglass, and they actually produced the molds for it and used the same production process as they used to make their hot tubs. So that's a computer space fact for you. I have also been in the presence of a rather nice replica of this as well. And there's another photo of me standing next to a computer space. This is the one at the Arcade Archive, of course, down at the Retro Collective down in Gloucester. And indeed, Holly, who was involved in the production of this replica, although I will say I think it was mainly Richard who did all of the 3D printing and modelling and stuff on this, but not to discount Holly's contribution. But Holly was very keen to get a photo of me next to it for scale, because I was actually featured in the video as one of the ways that they used to determine the scale of this machine to produce their replica. And as you can see, it's pretty much spot on. Reese for scale. Anyway, enough about me. Let's go and check out this auction. I'm going to refresh this so we can get the latest price, just in case there have been any more bids on this. It's disappeared. Where's the pricing info? Oh, do I have to log in now? My goodness. Anyway, Computer Space, two-player arcade video game, fully functional two-player green sparkle version of Computer Space, the first arcade video game ever created. We know, of course, a little bit about the cabinet and, of course, the gameplay and stuff, but essentially, the front control panel features a 25-cent quarter slot, a coin return button, a red start game button, green two-player operation button, two original rotational joysticks topped with red fire missile buttons. The game's simple gameplay instructions are printed beneath the monitor. Read as follows. Insert quarter, press two-player if desired, press start button, and then it talks about one-player and two-player operation, blah-de-blah-de-blah. And indeed, you can follow the link down in the description if you want to read a little bit more about this. However, I think the most important part of this, I can't believe, where's the price gone? It was on here a minute ago. It was up to about $8,000, and I've refreshed the page and now it's disappeared. Oh well. What's quite impressive here are these photos. And I'm going to click through them. And this rather weird kind of transition that happens as you click through them. I want to have a look at the control panel. There it is. So you can see that control panel there. Of course, nothing like this had ever been built before, and they were basically making it up as they went along. So the original Computer Space arcade cab used buttons for left and right to rotate the ship and also to fire. And when they came up with the two-player version, decided that was too difficult for people, so they decided to experiment with joysticks. And essentially, joysticks. Whatever happened to those? Of course, they went on to set the standard for arcade games for years to come. Really impressive looking machine. Very, very original, of course. We've got all the photos here to prove it. These were consumer TVs that were kind of bought from Sears, I think, and kind of stripped down and adapted to these cabs because nobody made arcade monitors at the time, believe it or not. And all good old-fashioned electronics as well. No ROMs in this, no CPU, no RAM. It's all discrete electronics. It's all diodes and transistors and all of that wonderful stuff. So, this is your chance to own one of these, perhaps the only chance that might come along ever in your lifetime. So, do hop to it. The auction ends in a week's time on the 21st of August, and hopefully I'll remember to give you an update on that as and when it finishes. Hopefully. If I don't, please remind me. My goodness, do I need to get out of this sweaty office and go and sweat at home? Well, I suppose I've got the nice air-conditioned drive to look forward to before then. But Yeah, with that, let's get on with Video of the Week, which is my regular feature wherein I feature videos that I've seen here on the old YouTubes in the past week that have entertained, enlightened, educated, or otherwise improved my life in some small way. Sometimes they're about vintage and retro computing, gaming, and technology. Sometimes they aren't. Sometimes they're videos that I have actually seen and can personally vouch for. I do have a few of those this week. And sometimes they are videos that have been recommended to me that I haven't quite got around to watching just yet. Just in the interest of full disclosure. But this week I have 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, my vision's gone a bit blurry. Probably shouldn't have looked directly at the Eclipse. I have 4 videos for you this week, and they are all very much on topic. So let's dive into this with the first one. This is to do with the Dawn of the Machine mission pack from Machine Games for Quake, for the 30th anniversary. I've been playing this to death over the past week. I've been thoroughly enjoying it as a huge Quake fan. It is absolutely brilliant. And this video is from Digital Foundry, of course, who very much know their stuff when it comes to this stuff. So if you want to watch any video about this, highly recommend this one. 14 minutes and 30 seconds. It's the story of how this expansion pack came to be. It's the story of Quake, no less, and indeed the 30th anniversary. Let's just skip on a bit. The Night Dive remaster and kind of all of that backstory as well. Let's see some footage of the actual, the episode in action. So this is huge in scale. It is absolutely massive, the scale of some of these levels and things, but they are very much Quake. You know, they've done some interesting stuff with this. There's this interesting new time travel mechanic, which I wasn't sure about, but actually the way they've integrated it is seamless and it just works. It just makes sense, you know, seeing the same environments kind of in different eras and how they've decayed and stuff. You kind of have to experience it yourself to understand how it works. And they have made some tweaks, you know, to some of the weapons and also introduced some new enemies that are based on kind of a much-loved Quake classics. But again, very much in the spirit of the original game and very much what you would expect from Machine Games, of course. Now, one thing that I learnt from this Digital Foundry video is that this wasn't an official kind of thing from, Bethesda or id Software or Night Dive or anyone else kind of involved with the original remaster. These levels are built by a team of people at Machine Games called Quake Club, who essentially do this for free in their own time. They basically hang around after work to play Quake and to talk about all things Quake and to make their own levels and things just for their own entertainment. And they basically pulled all of this work together into one coherent and, dare I say, rather epic episode for Quake. And my God, is this good. It's also free. If you own the remaster from 2021, you will find that this has landed on your machine for free this week. And it's brilliant. I love it. I need to wrap this up so I can go home and finish playing it. So anyway, that's 14 minutes, 31 seconds from Digital Foundry. And it is the new Dawn of the Machine mission pack from Machine Games. It's a review. It's the story behind it. It's an explanation of Quake itself and how this all kind of fits into the larger Quake ecosystem. And on that note, I also found this article, just as a bit of an aside. I know this is Video of the Week where I talk about videos, but over on the Slayers Club website over on Bethesda.net, this is the behind the scenes of the making of Dawn of the Machine for Quake, and I believe this was the source of some of the information for the Digital Foundry video, but it does go into a lot more detail about how this episode was created and how it all came about, and you've got some behind-the-scenes information, documentation, some original diagrams and drawings and things in there, and some first-hand info from the actual developers involved. So I'll also link that down below. Do go check that out if you are a fan of Quake, and indeed if you have been enjoying Dawn of the Machine, as I have. My second video is also about Quake, and I thought I would lump both of these together because this is that leaked expansion pack from the early 2000s that I talked about earlier in this ramble. And somebody has actually downloaded this. This is the alpha of Quake 4 The Awakening, missions 1 to 3. And of course, I talked about this earlier on. Someone has downloaded this from that GitHub repository that I mentioned, and they've built it all. They've got it all up and running and actually played through the first 3 missions of this leaked alpha. So if you don't want to go through all of that hassle yourself to get it set up and to play it for yourself, you can just sit and watch this video. It's 34 minutes and 47 seconds long, and it is very much Quake 4. It's also very Doom 3 as well. I know Quake 4 was quite, obviously it was built on the same engine and stuff and was quite heavily influenced by Doom 3. A lot of people think that it wasn't enough of a departure from that, kind of stylistically. I'd be inclined to agree, and I think this only backs that up. If you take a look at some of this footage, you'd be forgiven for thinking that it was Doom 3. But it is very, very interesting historically, and like I say, if you haven't got time to get it all up and running, you could just go and check out the video over on PAGB666. 34 minutes, 47 seconds long, as mentioned. The next video is, well, I talked about Unreal, didn't I, from 1998 earlier on in this ramble, and this does actually have a connection because it was made by the same company, Epic. But it's probably not what you're thinking, because this is Jazz Jackrabbit. Yes, indeed, this was a game made by Epic before they became Epic Games that we know and love, making Unreal and Gears of War and well, they do Fortnite. They did, didn't they? I think Fortnite was Epic as well. Jazz Jackrabbit 2. I love Jazz Jackrabbit, the original. Haven't really played 2 all that much over the years, but GOG.com has this remastered, re-released, upgraded, enhanced version called Jackrabbit 2 Plus, Jazz Jackrabbit 2 Plus. This is the trailer for it. It supports higher resolutions. It's got all these nice high-res sprites and graphics and things, widescreen, all these online multiplayer modes, a level editor, and all sorts of exciting stuff. So if you're a fan of the Jazz Jackrabbit games, you could definitely do worse than go and check this out and pick this up from GOG.com, JJ2.plus. Yeah, Jazz Jackrabbit 2 Plus. And the fourth and final video that I have for you for this selection of videos of the week is this one. I've been watching this. I actually need to get around to watching the second half of this, but this is a BBC documentary from the year 2000. It's the World Wide Web special from Tomorrow's World. I very fondly remember Tomorrow's World growing up as a kid. I'm not going to hit play on this, partly because I'm not sure what the copyright situation is on it, and also partly because I don't want to lose my place when I go home and finish watching the second half of this. But yeah, Tomorrow's World was a technology series on the BBC throughout. I think it started in the 70s, actually, but I remember watching it kind of in the early 90s, and all the stuff about, you know, the space shuttle and computer advances and music technology. And, you know, it was really, really well put together, really educational and absolutely fascinating for a geek boy like me when I was a kid. This was a special that they did at the turn of the millennium. And from what I've seen, the first half of it, it is, I want to say it's hilarious, but it's not really. You know, it took me back to a time when the internet was just so exciting and so full of promise, and everyone was looking to the future. And, you know, it wasn't all about bloody ads and scams and crypto stuff and tracking and AI and all of this rubbish. I know I'm starting to sound old here, and but, you know, there are people, families, you know, grown adults with children in this show that have never been on the internet before. They've never used a web browser, and they stick them in front of a computer and they say, right, you've got to use the internet to book a holiday or research your family history or, you know, all that exciting stuff we were doing back in 2000 on the internet. And it's just so lovely to see that just how... Yeah, you kind of have to see it to kind of judge the tone for yourself. But it's brilliant. And it's a proper full-blown TV show that was on at the time. It is half an hour long, and I can't wait to get back and watch the second half of this because, yeah, it's just a time capsule. It's a time capsule of kind of the era that I grew up in. I was 16 when this was released. I'd been on the internet for kind of about 5 years, I think, at this point at home. And... you know, it even introduces broadband to the world, this whole concept of high-speed internet. And they actually go to somebody's house, one of the first people in the UK to get broadband, because they're part of this BT trial, and actually get them to demo it and kind of talk about what broadband is all about. And it was like 256k or whatever it was at the time. So very, very cool stuff. So they're my videos of the week for you. We have 2 Quake-related videos, starting with that Digital Foundry documentary, all about Dawn of the Machine, the new release, with a bonus article for you to read as well over on the Slayers Club website. There's that leaked alpha of Quake 4 The Awakening. There's the gameplay from that, 34 minutes, 47 seconds, if you want to see what that's all about. There's the trailer for Jazz Jackrabbit 2 Plus on GOG.com, which, to be honest, I just wanted to give a bit of a shout out to as a big fan of the Jazz Jackrabbit games. Looks very interesting. And finally, the kind of meat of all of this, that's BBC documentary on the BBC Archive 2000, the World Wide Web Special, Tomorrow's World from the BBC Archive. And that is all I have for you for this week's Ramble. I am desperate to get going, not only to watch this, but also to play some more Quake. But I do have two more little stories for you this week that I just wanted to give a little mention to. So do check out the links to these down in the description, indeed, alongside all the videos I just talked about and everything else talked about this week. The first is Dune City, which, as we say in Leicester and indeed in the UK, Dune, but it is Dune. You know, the film series and the book series and the games and things. It doesn't need any introduction, but it's basically a city builder, very much inspired by the original version of SimCity, but themed around the world of Dune, the universe of Dune. So this looks very interesting indeed. You can go and download it. There's a beta version, and it's kind of a mashup between the Dune games and the SimCity games. So I thought that looks very interesting indeed. And also this first-person shooter, heavily inspired by Wolfenstein, and we've had a lot of shooter action, we've had a lot of id Software action in this episode, so I didn't want to talk about this one too much, but this is noteworthy because it was released on the Game Boy Color, which has never really had a proper first-person shooter. And I have to say, based on the restrictions and the confines of the hardware in question here, this is bloody impressive stuff. All right, it plods around at about 2 frames per second, but it looks very playable. Graphically, it is very recognisably a first-person shooter. It's called Wolf. It's $1.99. It is, it wears its inspiration on its sleeve. It is very much a Wolfenstein-inspired game, and you can go and check that out in the usual place. But that's all I have for you, and that is genuinely all I have for you this time around. Thanks ever so much for joining me. You can check out Reese Rambles every week on my second YouTube channel, youtube.com/Reese Rambles, or indeed on your podcast platform of choice, 2 minutes to midnight UK time every Friday. That's all I've got for you. Thanks once again for joining me, and I'll see you again, same time and place, next week, I think. Or am I on holiday? I'll let you know. Anyway, bye.